There's been a lot of ink spilled over this idea of what the zombies are and what the zombies do. This article from 1975 points out that the Haitian voodoo, the Cuban santeria, the Brazilian candomblé can serve to demonstrate this transformation of elements of African culture in the Americas. The Haitian zombie illustrates a particular form of its transformation. The character of the living dead, of which Mbadi speaks in a religious being, not the social being that the Haitian zombie represents. That person who belongs to the African quote unquote living dead is an individual who finds himself midway between the gods and mankind, is a halfway house where he remains before detaching himself completely from the earth and men and returning permanently to the spirit world. This condition is normal, reflecting a normal state in man's relationship to God and thus the universe as well. So we see these connections between African quote unquote religion and the Haitian religion or practices in a way, and zombies as a result were for a very long time considered to be kind of a purely Haitian a purely Haitian concept and something that just came from a long, long, almost lost African tradition, which means that the meaning of the zombie has been observed in this kind of in between space, as indicated here, halfway between the Americas and Africa, or halfway between heaven and hell, halfway between purgatory and whatever the opposite of purgatory might be. Um, the problem is that, of course, this is not entirely correct, mostly because it is detaching from the fact that, in fact, there is a tradition of quote unquote zombies existing in Africa as well, and there is no reason to separate the two besides by geography. And of course, the only reason why they are separated geographically is the slave trade. It's not due to the fact that the religion evolved in any way. It's certainly not due to the fact that people changed their minds. It is due to the fact that they were forcibly separated from the rest of the tradition. And the most common way in which the zombie manifested itself in those early years has been in the context of slavery and the slave trade. As a result, the zombies were shown as descendants of Africans, or maybe even descendants of slaves, within a within the context of social oppression and social hegemony. So being a zombie in the world, and especially in the colonial world, is a very different idea that being a zombie in the Western world of culture. And unfortunately, because of these connections, especially this overbearing influence of Western religion, the more common way in which the zombie is portrayed is closer to that European view of, for example, here one of the first movies about zombies with the zombie eyes, he rendered her powerless. So again, a system of domination of men and women, and you have the picture on the left, kind of a screenshot of what those zombies look like, kind of halfway between pirates and Frankenstein. The zombie grip, he made her perform his every desire. So the slavery dialectic is kind of happening still in the pictures that we saw in the past few videos. We have the zombie is turned into a slave by a priest of some sort, and they have to do their bidding and of some sort. So once the soul is removed from the people, they lose their will to live in a way. Later movie, The Night of the Living Dead, has a somewhat of a similar timeline as well. A young man turns to a again a priest of some sort to lure a woman away from her fiance, but instead he turns her into a zombie slave because she is deprived of her will by this magic spell that is taken. So kind of a male to female relationship, and the zombies look like the one on the left there. That being said, the more modern version of the zombie that we know comes from the movie Night of the Living Dead from 1968 by George Romero. This is the kind of the comeback of the zombie as this infected character, the result of some kind of a virus, some kind of a plague, and also a character that is living in Caribbean. So we have people of color, we have men and women kind of all put in the same boat against the zombie, whatever it might be. And you may know or may not know, depending on how interested you are in those things, that Romero was inspired by the book I Am Legend in making this movie. There's another I Am Legend movie that was made, I don't know, 15 years ago or whatever, kind of a post-apocalyptic um, thriller of some sort. Um, not a zombie movie by any stretch. So there's something a lot more human, something a lot more gripping about the story here of these monsters um, who are infected by some kind of a virus, some kind of a pandemic of some sort, and people who are turned into some sort of well, legendary mythical creature. In I Am Legend, it's closer to be a vampire. In Night of the Living Dead, it's closer to being what we now know as zombies, but it deals with those very existential troubles. And of course, here we are told that those zombies, or as true as they are called in the movie, ghouls, because Night of the Living Dead, even though it is an inspiration for zombies now, does not even use the word zombies. Those so those ghouls will continue to eat all persons and kind of indiscriminate monsters that are kind of laying in the shadows. And so in a way, this new story, and probably for good reason, the better remembered one is a lot closer to the original spirit of the zombie as it is designed as the zombie story, and no pun intended for that matter. And especially because the more commonly known zombies are actually much closer to the figure of a hero and even full hero in the case of here, Francois Macandala. Slave Macondal, born in Africa, belonged to Mr. Normand de Mézy. That's the de Mézy family, the same that I mentioned in the first video this week. His hand had to be cut off when he was caught in a mill that made him an animal keeper. He ran away. During his desertion, he became notorious for his poisoning, which spread terror amongst the blacks, all of whom he held in submission. He ran a school for teaching his damnable art. He had agents in every corner of the colony, and death followed his slightest signal. Finally, he had conceived this vast plan to remove from the surface of Saint-Domingue, Haiti, every person not a black, and his continuously increasing successes has engendered a fear which made them more certain still. The vigilance of the magistrates and of the government did not avail to discover the means of doing away with this scoundrel, and those misdeeds, punished by almost instant death, only served to cause more terror. So, a slave born in Africa, but turned into a monster, and especially a monster that turns the otherwise docile slaves into other monsters themselves, and turning these people into a rebel, kind of becoming the much larger number, and again, right, uncontrollable source of people that are perceived as a danger. And it's very, again, interesting to have this kind of language stated here in 1981, which is obviously very uh, afraid of this slave revolt. This is a more fictionalized account from 1957, but with the same idea. Now we have fungi. Those there were those which smelled of wood rot, of medicine bottles, of cellars, of sickness, pushing through the ground in the shape of ears, ox tongues, wrinkle excrescences, covered with exudations, opening their striped parasols in damp recesses, the homes of toads that slept or watched with open eyelids. The Mondang crumbled the flesh of a fungus between his fingers, and his nose caught whiff of a poison. He held his hand to a cow. She sniffed and drew back her head with frightened eyes, snorting. Macandal picked more fungi of the same species, putting them in an untanned leather pouch hanging from his neck. This story is taking place in Cuba. So this is a fictionalized version of this fictionalized version. So same Macandal who was a slave revolt in Haiti, but now transposed in the Cuban system. So say kind of a similar heritage, similar area, albeit in a completely different idea, but especially turned into this magical potion of again poison that people can smell and be transformed into a completely different person. Yes, another one, kind of this time emphasizing the more cultural hero version of Macandal. Macandal should have died, but the Mending slave was no ordinary man. Even before the accident, he was a leader among the slaves in the northern district around Lambay. When he spoke, people considered it an honor to sit by his side, and as he slept, the women vied for the chance to share his bed, for his dreams were revelations that allowed him and those by him to see into the future. But it was the fearless way Macandal would endure the accident on the mill that confirmed that what the people had always suspected. Only the whites could fail to know that Macandal was immortal, an envoy of the gods who would never be vanquished. So again, psychological, sexual power of Macandal as a zombie, as a leader, maybe a man of power, as an immortal character, kind of larger than life, still kind of dominating the more impressionable people. And of course, this is something that is a trait that is almost common in the mythology of Africans and African Americans to this day, of this mastery of slavery of botany and poison to turn people into the reverse of whatever they were. So they are seen as this version of ourselves that we have taken away, this quote unquote natural space of nature that we have that we have escaped to the cities, to the orderly life of the Western world, and they are representing this dangerous hordes that exist outside of our control. And in and of itself, again, this idea is not new. Part of the story that Fouchard was telling about Haiti exists in the earliest years of banning the use of poison. And again, right, so the same idea, poisoning by slaves increased, but with no recognizable means of combating the contagion. The courts condemned the guilty. Some work gangs were practically decimated by capital punishment ordered by the court. The feeling grew that the ringleaders were not affected by these strong measures, that to catch the leaders, slaves suspected of murdering by poison should be isolated, but it was pointed out that isolation in the colony would be ineffective. The administrators decided to banish to France those considered dangerous and even carried out the decision in one or two cases. Studies on the kinds of poison in use were ordered. The investigations did nothing to calm minds because they were inconclusive. They concluded with the question as to whether the poisons were vegetable or metallic, whether the slaves or the apothecaries' supplies were the source. The cause of all this evil was the very slave whom the colonists were slow in recognizing as the source of their ills because he was at the same time their wealth. So the use of poison as a method of resistance was already well known in the colonial era, and as a result, it was not very surprising to have these characters that were kind of wielding death in mysterious ways, probably because there was very severe punishment for anything else, and even the punishment of punishing these would-be poisoners is to send them back to France, which is a place that they would not know and they would not be aware of, but also something that was used as a kind of as a ghost, as a boogeyman, as a specter to to scare people. That the worst thing it could do to them is to take them out of their life and put them into the big city in a way. So, unfortunately, at this point, we are left with the idea of the zombies as they are presented in the Western media, especially through The Serpent and the Rainbow. So, this is the movie that was based on the Wade Davis book that I mentioned earlier this week. Again, some very common motifs here, although pretty close to the vampire, much closer to the vampire, but also surfing on the wave of the Nightmare of Elm Street. So, a horror movie, pretty straightforward as something scary, not so much as something that is that has any kind of ties to the larger history of colonial or even post-colonial resistance. That being said, in other media, especially outside of the West, there are examples of zombies that are used in a much more traditional way. This is a character named Zombie, Zumbi, in Brazil, another slave revolter that exists in the plantation society of Brazil. Laid his own slave revolt, and again, so his name was Zombie. So whether or not he was uh, um, the part of the mythology, or whether he was named after that, it is not quite clear. But this is a descendant of slave reversing the pattern of oppression, and leading his people to recover their land, recover their story in the whatever supernatural ways, whatever magical ways they employ to do this. It could not be the result of their superior will, of their existence, being literally threatened by slavery. It has to be turned into a magical feat, because only through magic would they be able to defeat the great European settlers, the great European colonists, who according to themselves anyway, had managed to enslave the land, by their own cultural heroes, by their own might. But it turns out that, force and violence is only one way in which you can control people. There is also the possibility of the kind of the more rhetorical way, the more mythological way. In Deleuze and Guattari, they identify most straightforwardly the zombie as the only form of modern myth that exists. The mortified schizos, good for work, brought back to reason. In this sense, the primitive and the barbarian, with their ways of coding death, are children in comparison to modern man and his axiomatic. So many unemployed are needed, so many deaths. The Algerian war doesn't kill more people than weekend automobile accidents, planned death in Bengal, etc. Modern man raves to a far greater extent as delirium as a switchboard. So, in Deleuze and Guattari, they are portraying the kind of the ideal of capitalism as the slave, as the person who is just working without questioning their boss, becoming schizophrenic as a result, only good for work, and finding pleasure in the wildest dreams, not in being a person who is able to control their daily life, but rather in the more extreme forms of entertainment. The more colors, the louder the music, the more vivid the images is the only thing that can quell the modern man. So in Deleuze and Guattari, the ideal life in capitalism is the body without organs. It's the one that doesn't have needs or desires or regulation, that can just move through life as being a a part of the machine in a way. And they have a slightly bigger, longer story for that. That is that the body with an organ can be either empty or full, or cancerous, depending on how life works out. So depending on what they find in life, they might find these new channels to refresh themselves in a way. And so they become zombies by eating brains, quote unquote. So by preying on other ideas, by incorporating other parts of their lives, rather than making conscious choices into to what is happening here, which extends that conversation of capitalism to what we are knowing today as voodoo economics, as zombie banks. So we have included this imagery into our modern vocabulary. So voodoo economics is systems of economics that we cannot that we cannot completely explain because they answer to the wills of the market, and so therefore it's much easier to just fail to explain them in the more complex way than they work, and much easier to give them the name voodoo and kind of hope for the best for it. Zombie banks being banks that have lost all of their funding but still continue to operate, to borrow money and to sell assets, even though they don't have the actual money for themselves. Something that's beginning more to be more and more important, and they only exist because they are subsidized either by some angel investor or by a government of some sort. The latest model for this zombies come from drugs, because this is also kind of a part of the mythology to a certain extent, and there are every now and then these kind of moral panics that come about from the use of certain drugs, and especially drugs that come from outside of the United States. A few years ago, that was the drug called crocodile, urban legend, not a metaphysical fact, according to the American Journal of Medicine. You had all of these memes and these videos of people who are poisoned slash drugged, kind of maintained into this quote unquote zombie state by the drug. And we didn't know what it was. We didn't know exactly what it did. We only saw the videos of what the examples were. To the best of our knowledge, that drug crocodile was supposed to come from Russia because that was the big danger, the big scary people. And as far as we know, the people who did any kind of research on these drugs found that the most potent drugs that existed in Russia had a certain chemical concentration. And once they found this in the United States, it was really trace amount. There was no such thing as a crocodile epidemic of some sort. So these videos and these imageries, this mythology is kind of making us more aware of fear and torture and violence and horror and all of those things that we would not otherwise be aware of in our daily lives, because they are just not part of our existence. Unlike what was happening in the colonial era for people who were daily experiencing horror, who were daily experiencing fear and oppression, and so therefore they created this new imagery to fight it. And today we have completely reversed the meaning of the imagery for the zombie to be something that is manageable for us, not a cultural hero of any sort. So now we are fully making our way into this connection between the what is foreign to us, what is common to us, and all of that becomes kind of melted into the life that we are living in, where we have international influences on our religious systems, on our mythology, on our images, and all of those things come up to essentially create our daily life of horror and maybe whatever the opposite of horror is.